Bev's been researching a book which is coming out next March, and that's all about the struggles of the mining communities and what's been going on since the mining strike. And I believe she's been up to Orgreave, and she's going to be talking to us about the experiences of the UK's mining communities since then and what they experienced during the strike. So, Bev.
Is this okay? Can you all hear me okay? Okay. I just wanted to say one little thing before I begin, because we're in Brighton. I know that not all of you are from Brighton, but I've been going through the archives for the miners' strike up in Barnsley, and I found a Christmas card which says, "Christmas greetings to the Yorkshire striking miners. Please use this cheque to buy presents for the children. Solidarity and best wishes from your comrades in Brighton." So I thought I had to just say that. In a nutshell, I'm sure most of you know, Orgreave was where police inflicted such brutality and violence upon the striking miners that £500,000 were awarded, and remember this is 30 years ago, £500,000 were awarded to the miners for injuries inflicted and wrongful arrest, and the South Yorkshire police were investigated by the Independent Police Claims Commission. Now, the Battle of Orgreave, which happened today, 30 years ago, it's not a nickname, it was a battle. It was a full-on battle. And in fact, it wasn't just one day. It had been going on for 6 weeks at Orgreave. And that's because Orgreave coking station was a hugely strategic place for the battle between the miners and the government. And this was because the miners were trying to get the steelworks closed. The nearby Scunthorpe steelworks were dependent on coke coming in from Orgreave. The miners knew that if they could close down the steelworks, it would have a big effect on the country, just as in 1974 they managed to get the power stations shut down. The railway workers wouldn't touch the coke. They said, "We're not delivering it, we're in solidarity with the miners, we're not touching it." So Margaret Thatcher had paid a huge amount to haulage firms to get lorries to come in to take the coke to Scunthorpe. So the pickets' job was to stop the lorries. Now, they weren't actually getting a great deal of support from the NUM. The pickets wanted mass picketing every day at Orgreave. The NUM were just a bit too slow off the mark and just allowed mass picketing very sporadically. So every day the pickets were arriving and they were having hand-to-hand battles, full-on fights, man-to-man, police officers with pickets to get into the area of Orgreave. And as this went on, the police violence got worse, and then the riot police appeared. And this was the first time that riot police had been used in this country. And this was when Arthur Scargill was arrested, and the violence was getting much, much worse. Nevertheless, the pickets were still coming back and getting into the site. On the day of the Battle of Orgreave, the 18th of June, it was a bit different. The pickets arrived and found that actually the police were almost welcoming. These were flying pickets. They were coming from all over the country. So they were arriving in their battered old cars, 4 or 5 miners in a car. They were getting some petrol money from the union. And the police were actually directing them to the car parks and telling them where to go. Most unusual, and the pickets wondered what was going on. And of course, now we know the pickets were being set up. This was the day that Thatcher had been longing for. This was her battle. This was what she'd been preparing for months, and she'd spent millions of pounds preparing for it. Anyway, the pickets came in, and one of the miners showed me a lovely photograph. It was a beautiful, hot summer's day, and there's a lovely photograph of all the pickets lying in the fields, sunbathing, in their t-shirts and jeans, waiting for the lorries to arrive. Then beyond them there are rows and rows and rows of riot police, 4,500 police. And then beyond that, the coking plant. So the pickets were waiting around, and then the word came out, the lorries are coming. Up get the pickets, go towards the police for the usual battle, and then to everybody's absolute amazement, including the journalists, the cameramen, the media, everybody was there, the rows of riot police opened out, a bit like the Red Sea, and the cavalry just came charging through. And these riot police on horseback with weapons, were not just trotting, they were charging through to get to the pickets. And at the same time, the dogs were released. And for a few seconds, the pickets stood just completely paralysed. They just literally didn't know what on earth was happening. This was totally unprecedented. And then they realised the horror of it all, and they were terrified, and they thought they were going to be killed. And in fact, some of them nearly were. And they started to pick up anything they could, stones, rocks, bricks, handfuls of earth, anything, to throw at the horses to try and stop the charge. And of course, recently, as we know, the BBC issued an apology, if you can call it that, to say they're very sorry. They accidentally, so they say, reversed the footage, the news footage that night on TV, and it made it look as if the pickets were attacking the police. In fact, the pickets were defending themselves from attack. The film footage had been reversed. Anyway, the pickets realised they'd got to ran as fast as they could. And most of them got to the end of the field and just threw themselves down an embankment onto the railway lines below to escape the horses. Some of them managed to run back to the village of Orgreave, where local residents were giving them rocks and bricks, anything, to throw at the police. 30 of them managed to get to a supermarket, and a manager there hid them all in a storeroom. There were helicopters going around as well. Police helicopters were everywhere, watching for where these pickets were running to. The dogs were running around, and it was carnage, really. And one miner said that he was a little way away. He hadn't seen the horses coming out, but he said he felt it. He felt the earth pounding as the hooves were pounding the ground. And they chased him, and he tried to turn around to this cop on horseback who caught up with him, and he said, "I'm a coal miner. What are you doing? I'm a coal miner. You know, we're all wearing t-shirts and jeans, and there are you guys in riot gear with weapons. What are you doing?" The police on horseback were using what the miners jokingly call bendy truncheons. And these were truncheons that were a lot longer than normal police truncheons, and they had a sort of an inbuilt spring in them, so that when you whacked with it, it was like using a steel whip. And what they would do, the police on horseback would chase a picket, try and whack the back of his legs to bring him down, and the police on the ground would then pile into the picket. And there's video footage of 2, 3, 4 police officers beating up a single miner. Another place they liked to try and hit was the back of the neck with this steel whip. Incredibly painful, and there are stories of 16, 17-year-old boys just lying there crying, men screaming in pain, men vomiting in pain, and of course the dogs were still running around attacking everybody as well. A lot of the pickets were quite elderly. They were retired. They'd just come to join the picket line. And they couldn't run. They were falling on the ground. It was a hot day. And a lot of the younger ones who were still upright, as it were trying to grab their colleagues who had fallen. All miners have a very good sense, a very good knowledge of health and safety and first aid. They have to before they can go underground. And they were going back to try and drag their colleagues who had been injured out of the way, because if the pickets got to the ambulances which were awaiting, they were arrested immediately. So the injured pickets were saying to their friends, please, please, help me, try and help me, get me undercover, I don't want to go to hospital. So it was very bad, and after that the NUM called the right, no more Orgreave, leave Orgreave, we'll abandon it. And actually that's when the women's group stepped forward and they said, no, we'll picket it, we'll carry on. There was a network of women's groups across the country, Women Against Pit Closures, and they went and picketed the place with their kids. It was the summer holidays, and the police treated the women no differently to how they treated the miners. The women were punched, pushed, kicked between the legs. They were called whores and sluts in front of their children. It was dreadful. And I'm convinced, actually, the miners I've spoken to, who for a long time couldn't go picketing again for weeks, for months, I think they were suffering symptoms of, what's it called? Post-traumatic stress syndrome, which had only just been recognised. And from then on, it was civil war. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bev, and I'm sure Bev will be happy to take any questions that you've got later on. And for anyone who was here when we had the Brighton's 30th anniversary celebrations of the miners' strike back at the beginning of March, if you didn't notice the announcement that we put out, we actually raised £744. No, sorry, 700? Yeah, £744 that day, and that was split half and half between the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign and the Kent Miners Festival. So 372 has gone off to both of those two organisations, just to let you know.